Nathan Brooks stood at the edge of the pool, watching the sunlight dance across the water. Laughter and splashes filled the air as families enjoyed the cool relief from the sweltering summer heat. To the community, this was just another public pool, a welcome addition to the neighborhood. But what no one knew was that Nathan was the man behind it. He had grown up in this very neighborhood. Back then, there had been no parks, no places where kids could play safely, no areas where the elderly could sit and enjoy a conversation. The city had long neglected this side of town, and people had grown used to having nothing. But Nathan hadn't forgotten what it was like to be a kid here. After years of hard work, he had finally reached a level of success where he could give back. So, in secret, he purchased an abandoned lot, renovated it, and transformed it into a community pool, all without taking credit. He didn't want fame or recognition. He simply wanted to make a difference. But there was one person who saw the pool as a problem rather than a gift. The first time Karen Reynolds saw the pool, she made her presence known. She lived in a large, white-pillared house on the other side of the street, the kind of home that made it clear she considered herself above everyone else. She was in her late 50s, a woman who wore oversized sunglasses and spoke to people like they were beneath her. Nathan noticed her the first time she came strutting into the pool area, her heels clicking against the pavement. "This is unacceptable," she declared, waving her manicured hand toward the water. A young lifeguard, no older than 18, stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Karen scoffed. "Of course there's a problem. This place used to be quiet. Now look at this. Loud music, people everywhere, and children screaming. Who approved this?" "Just someone who believes this neighborhood deserves better," Nathan replied with a polite smile. Karen glared at him. Nathan could see it in her eyes, the resentment, the entitlement. She didn't just dislike the pool, she disliked the people using it. And that was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Karen's behavior grew more aggressive. She would stand just outside the pool fence, arms crossed, glaring at the families inside. She would call the city offices daily, complaining about unruly behavior, too much noise, and how the pool was ruining the neighborhood. When that didn't work, she started spreading rumors. "Do you know who's coming here? People from the next neighborhood over. And you know what that means. Crime, vandalism. It's only a matter of time." Nathan overheard her one afternoon, whispering to a group of older homeowners. "They're lowering our property values," she hissed. "Soon, this place will be a slum." Nathan clenched his jaw. He had dealt with people like Karen before, people who thought they were above everyone else. But things escalated when she took matters into her own hands. One evening, Nathan arrived at the pool and stopped in his tracks. The gate was chained shut. A heavy-duty padlock dangled from the metal bars. A sign had been hastily taped to the entrance, "Pool closed until further notice, by order of the Community Association." Nathan frowned. There was no community association that had the authority to do this. He pulled out his phone and checked the security cameras he had installed around the area. Sure enough, the footage showed Karen herself smugly securing the lock onto the gate earlier that afternoon. Nathan took a deep breath, unclipped the lock with his own key, and reopened the pool the next morning. But Karen was already waiting for him. "You have no right to remove that lock," she snapped. "This pool is open for everyone, Karen," Nathan replied. Karen's face turned red. "If you won't respect the rules, then I have no choice." And that's when she did the unthinkable. She pulled out her phone and called 911. Within minutes, sirens blared in the distance. Nathan watched as 2 police officers stepped out of their squad car, looking around. Karen rushed toward them, dramatically waving her arms. "Thank God you're here," she wailed. "That man is trespassing. He broke the lock, and now he's threatening me." Nathan sighed. He had expected this. Remaining calm, he raised his hands in a neutral position and stepped forward. "Good afternoon, officers. There's a security camera right here if you'd like to check the footage." Karen froze. Her face twisted in shock. "He's lying! This is my community!" The older officer took Nathan's phone and watched the footage in silence. It showed everything. Karen locking the gate herself. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "this is public property. You have no authority to close it." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "But he's letting in people who don't belong here." Nathan crossed his arms. "And who exactly doesn't belong?" Silence. The officer narrowed his eyes. "If you interfere again, you'll be charged with trespassing." Karen's face turned a deep shade of purple. She let out a frustrated growl before storming off. But Nathan knew this wasn't over. That night, Nathan did some digging. A few hours later, he found something that made his stomach turn. Karen's grandfather and great-grandfather had been leaders in a white supremacist group. Her parents had actively funded segregationist organizations. Nathan leaned back in his chair. He had suspected Karen's hatred ran deep. But this was generational. He knew exactly what to do next. Nathan sent everything to a journalist. The next morning, an article dropped. "Wealthy woman calls 911 on black neighbor. Her dark family secret exposed." Within hours, it went viral. Karen was humiliated. And when she tried to confront Nathan, the police were already watching her, because after the article dropped, she had been making threats online. The moment she lunged at Nathan, officers tackled her to the ground. Karen was arrested for harassment, making false reports, and attempted assault. Nathan? He finally had peace. And the community stood behind him. Karen had always believed she was untouchable. She had spent years looking down on others, convinced that the rules didn't apply to her. But today, standing at the edge of the community pool with flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the water, she finally realized she had lost. Nathan watched from a short distance as two police officers stepped out of their squad car. Karen, red-faced and seething, waved her arms wildly, pointing at him like a madwoman. "Arrest him! He assaulted me! He threatened me! One of the officers, a tall man with tired eyes, held up a hand. "Ma'am, take a deep breath. We need to assess the situation before—" Karen cut him off. "No, I don't need to calm down. That man is dangerous. This whole neighborhood is turning into a—" She stopped mid-sentence. A few feet away, Nathan stood calmly, arms crossed, watching her spiral. The younger officer turned to him. "Sir, can you tell us what's going on here?" Nathan simply pulled out his phone. "I have security footage," he said, his voice steady. "It shows her trespassing, harassing families, and making false reports to the police." Karen's face twisted in horror as he tapped the screen and handed it over. The officers watched in silence. The first clip showed Karen breaking the lock on the pool gate, muttering angrily to herself as she ripped off the private property sign and threw it on the ground. The second showed her screaming at a group of children, accusing them of ruining the neighborhood. And the final clip, the most damning of all, captured her fake 911 call from just minutes earlier. She had falsely claimed that Nathan was violent, aggressive, and had threatened to harm her. The older officer let out a deep sigh and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now much firmer, "we just watched you make a false emergency call. That is a serious offense." Karen shook her head violently. "You don't understand. He's manipulating you. That video is fake." The younger officer looked at Nathan. "Sir, do you have the original files?" Nathan nodded and handed over his phone. "All from my security system, fully time-stamped." Karen's panic turned to rage. "This is insane! I'm the victim here!" she screamed, her voice shrill and trembling. The officers didn't react. Instead, the older one pulled out his handcuffs. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for trespassing, filing a false police report, and disturbing the peace." Karen staggered back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "What? No, no! You can't do this to me!" The officers ignored her protests. As one of them reached for her arm, Karen made the worst mistake of her life. She lunged at Nathan. Fueled by rage, she threw herself forward, her hands curled into fists. But Nathan, expecting one last desperate move, stepped back just in time. Karen's momentum betrayed her. She stumbled, her heels catching the edge of the wet pavement. For one brief moment, she flailed helplessly, before falling straight into the pool. A loud splash echoed through the air. For a second there was complete silence. Then, muffled laughter rippled through the crowd of onlookers. Karen, now drenched and sputtering, flailed in the water like a fish out of its element. Her hair, once perfectly styled, hung over her face like seaweed. One of the officers sighed deeply. "Ma'am, you really aren't helping yourself here." Dripping and fuming, Karen grabbed the pool's edge, her face twisted in a mask of humiliation. "Get me out of here!" she shrieked. The officers finally pulled her out, but instead of offering her sympathy, they immediately cuffed her wrists behind her back. "You have the right to remain silent," the younger officer began, reciting the Miranda rights. Karen thrashed in their grip, but there was no escape. As she was led away, soaked and humiliated, the families around the pool cheered. For weeks, Karen had made their lives miserable. Now, justice had finally caught up with her. Nathan exhaled, feeling the tension in his chest finally release. He turned back toward the pool, watching as the kids resumed their play, their laughter ringing through the air. Parents smiled, chatting as if the dark cloud over the neighborhood had finally lifted. One of the mothers, an older woman who had been wary of the pool at first, approached him. "Thank you," she said, placing a hand on his arm, "for standing up to her, for fighting for this place." Nathan nodded, glancing around. The pool had never just been about cooling off in the summer heat. It was about bringing people together, a safe space for everyone. And now, it could finally serve its purpose. Meanwhile, as Karen was stuffed into the back of the police car, she stared out the window at the people she had tried so hard to push away. No one was looking at her. No one cared. She was just another bitter woman who had finally faced the consequences of her own actions. For the first time in her life, Karen was truly powerless.